Yeah.
Okay. So we divided things up into, and this will be just a fragmented description of things, but what I'm going to do is send out to colleagues within the naturopathic community looking for
Thank you.
looking for experts that know things about coffee enemas, that know about cold pressor stimulation, about carotid, different types of massage, pressure massage, carotid sinus massage, PEMF, which is the pulse electromagnetic field, and appropriateness for kids. Somebody who knows about meditation, chanting, and yoga for kids, acupuncture for kids, of course, and then looking for other elements within that list that I'm going to send of those different things from a diet standpoint that go beyond just the present situation. Again, all of these things come out of looking for reasons or ways to stimulate parasympathetic activity or vagal stimulation beyond just doing, a direct, obviously not saying, hey, let's do a deep brain or a carotid vagal stimulator. Equipment to be looking for is the TENS unit with the digital amp control, and that's because it's going to be very small. Again, investigational, but there is research for teenagers and adults using a clip on the ear, which I think you took a picture of.
Yes, I did.
And a TENS unit, and then connected to either the wrist or acupuncture point on the tib-fib area, and that TENS unit is for increasing parasympathetic activity, and as opposed to doing a carotid sinus stimulation. We talked about looking for other equipment for looking for observation skills and improving on observation skills to see if we can't find earlier and earlier signs, and considering the parasympathetic mechanism, looking for signs of increased sympathetic activity like goosebumps, heart rate elevation, sweating, flushing. Pupils would be a really good one, especially noting one pupil larger than the other. So a stethoscope to monitor gut function. So as you're doing things, no matter what you do, you want to look at outcome measures. Is something having a benefit or not having a benefit? And if we're thinking about this whole thing from monitoring or regulating it from an autonomic nervous system standpoint, we want to look for, are we having a consequence to parasympathetic elevation, sympathetic decreasing? So those things I mentioned, pupil sizes, sweating, flushing, but also looking at stomach activity. So increased peristalsis is associated with digestive changes, which would be parasympathetic, versus when you fight flight, your gut stops functioning. And then looking at other equipment, talking about vestibular input, vestibular system, inner ear, vestibular nuclei, that for the reasons of building plasticity or learning within the system, so that to decrease the potential of loss of motor function over time that you mentioned, but also because rocking, right? Like right now you're rocking, or why are you rocking? Or it's because that's relaxing. That's relaxing. You're firing the canals. That increase. We also do that when you're trying to digest. We do with the baby to try and promote digestion. So that's all parasympathetic. So using the receptors of the inner ear through vestibular nerve, through vestibular nuclei, and to cerebellum to promote that pathway, that constellation, that star metaphor that I was using. Everything that's connected, you excite one thing, you excite another. Everything central, cerebellum, cord, and ultimately brain, at any one time is a consequence of all receptor integration, whether that's light, sound, touch, smell, even, or turning for your inner ear. All of these things come into central processes and then into groups, and when those pathways are working, then you get protein replication within cells, you get synaptogenesis connected between cells, you're promoting health. And so that's going to be the general thing all the time, is thinking about is that your brain is a slave to the receptor, and all receptor activity, and the more that can be manipulated or activated without exceeding the metabolic capacities, because just because this much is good doesn't mean, like, an adjustment could be good, that doesn't mean like doing adjustment every 5 minutes is good.
Okay.
Let's see, other stuff for equipment that I have on here, heart rate, halter. Talked about the heart rate as a big, talking about George Corcoran, that's a name to write down. He's the guy in Phoenix that learned about the whole vagus stimulation through the earlobe.
Oh, okay.
Corcoran, K-U-R-I-N. George. I'll see him actually in a couple weeks when I'm in Phoenix, or hopefully. But looking at heart rate, and you've got that watch coming. Does it give you data to say, so we can look at heart rates elevating pre-seizure? Because that could give us a window to say, oh, let's do an implementation of parasympathetic activity, whatever that might be. Cold stimulation.
It's just spitting.
Okay. Cold stimulation, or carotid sinus stimulation, or any of these things. If it doesn't do it, then we talked about looking at, is there such thing as a kid's Fitbit? You know, that does give you a data point over time. Records, and you can log in and see what is my heart rate again at such and such time. Or does a Holter monitor actually exist, which is a monitor that people wear as adults to monitor heart rates, looking for arrhythmias. Does something like that exist for an infant to then be able to wear for a week or so, to then say, oh, geez, we get these spikes at 2 o'clock all the time, or looking for pattern, okay? Monitor, I mentioned pupils, goosebumps, sweating, flushing. Those are just observations that you need to really become expert at. Concepts that we discussed, we talked about vestibular activation. We just mentioned that and why that might be important. Observation skills, frequency and dose. So there's a journal on my website, and so it's just a blank thing. So feel free to use that as much as you can. We did this, and then this happened, and this and that, and that way you're just kind of ruminating. She's ruminating in my head of, well, hey, why don't you try this, or what about this? That kind of thing. So writing stuff in, because you want to, let's say we're implementing the TENS unit. The TENS unit, and we're monitoring heart rate, and we may have to adjust the frequency that is being done and the dosage. So you could be doing the right thing, but do too much of the right thing, and it becomes the bad thing. So looking at heart rate as an example, it's not the only example, but let's say she's sleeping, and we're monitoring heart rate, and it's have some variability, and then you do this vagal stim with the earlobe, and heart rate drops, or it's generally dropping, and that's good, and we're here, and you go 10 minutes, and it starts going back up, then maybe that's the time. So that's the observation that you need to make to then record, to which then I might say, hey, we'll do it 10 minutes or 8 minutes, or.
So that's why the heart rate thing would be a priority, to get that first.
I would say
to monitor.
I would say that's a very good window.
Okay.
Let's see. Observation skills, frequency, dose, and then the other thing that we talked about was migraine pathophysiology, and so the pathological, physiological response. So migraines themselves, there's a whole bunch of hypotheses as to why these things happen. Now, you mentioned that people afterwards have migraines or migraine symptoms or whatever else. I don't know this to be true, but I would imagine a possibility is that there could be a similar mechanism, in that there's a lot discussed in migraines about decreased blood perfusion to a cell. So when you decrease blood perfusion to a cell, so amount of blood getting to a cell, that also means less oxygen. When a cell has less oxygen, it's going to come closer to threshold, meaning it will fire more easily. When it suddenly starts firing, bang, 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 that's when people have auras. So it's almost like a cell group of cells having a seizure activity. I think of it like Chinese firecrackers. And then when the pain comes in is because you exceed your metabolic capacity of that cell. You switch from aerobic energy systems using oxygen to anaerobic energy systems, which then promotes free radicals and lactic acid, and that stimulates pain fibers, nociceptive fibers, and that's where the pain comes from. So if that is part of this recipe for her, knowing that people have this genetic abnormality but then don't necessarily realize it from a deficit standpoint, there has to be other variables. And so considering vestibular function, as we discussed, and considering pathophysiology of migraines, so typical things that happen with migraines are vagal stimulation as treatments, trigeminal nerve stimulations, and that's this whole thing that we could be using via here. We may say that might be, there's something called an SSEP, somatosensory evoked potentials. I don't have one. People who do have one probably won't use it in that way because it's not what it's designed for, but you can use, I'm trying to get a hold of a probe for a tongue, because stimulating the tongue gets straight into the trigeminal, so that's not something you're going to be able to have at home, but that may be an avenue to consider down the road.
Down the road, but the vagus, it would all be before that.
Yeah, vagus, because that's just a clip here and that. And again, anything that I'm saying here is entirely investigational, and especially investigational when it comes to a 21-month-old.
Sure.
And so hopefully I can squeeze out some answers from some people with respect to that when I see George, hopefully, in Phoenix. But he'll say probably a very safe response.
Right.
I see migraine pathophysiology, observation, frequency, and dose. I would say the first things from an implementation standpoint would be, there's the list, that website I'm going to send you, which again, I don't have any knowledge of this person or the validity of anything that he's saying, but there's things on there talking about even MSG in a positive sense, which floors me. Insulin, leptins, some other things that the dietitian may or may not know about. I'll put it out there to see, does anybody else know about any of this stuff? But that kind of thing may be things to add to, because one of the things mentioning for vagal stimulation, maybe not seizure, but for vagal, how does that fit in, is that actually insulin rushes might be good. So going with the diet with a little splurge of carbs might be, not suggesting that you do that, but that might be something to maybe somebody who thinks about this stuff all the time, who may also be a head scratcher, go, that makes sense.
Okay.
To explore. Simple things that I would say for all kids, crawl